Live.
Oh, I'm funny.
Hey! We're gonna wait for some people to show up.
I'm coming. I've got 4.
Not you.
Oh.
More people out there.
Want more than 1 fork?
Yeah,
Should
sure.
we do more?
Yeah.
We can do more multiple. Okay.
Some water. What? Someone just left. Oh my God! Now they all came back. Hi, welcome.
Hello.
I'm Evan.
I'm Grania.
She's gonna help out today since she's now our roommate now. She lives here forever.
Forever and ever.
So she's gonna help make some bread. We're gonna wait just a couple minutes. I think this might be kind of a busy video, so we'll wait just a second. Let some people join in before we start. So comments are over there. This is gonna be a good one. Since I can't hear you, type in. Let me know if you have questions as we get going. Since this is kind of a commonly messed up part of bread. When and how to feed the starter, what to do with that. So I'm bored of waiting. Let's go. They can just watch the video afterwards. So I'll show you what we're going to do, and then we'll start taking questions and talk about that. So we've got some starter. A lot of you picked up starter from me earlier. So I've got some here that I fed about 5-6 hours ago. I wish I had like a better camera, but this stuff is like perfect. It's really you can see it's like doubled in size and really big. You see if I stir it down, it's got a lot of activity going on. Now this stuff I fed this morning, and you're not gonna be able to see any of this, but anyways, this is about like 12-13 hours old, and it's already collapsed and fallen down. It's not at its peak viability, so we're gonna use
really sort of like thicker, whereas this one's a little bit more watery. You can't see it, but when you like pull the fork up, this one sort of sticks, and this one sort of like falls away quite quickly.
Okay. So we fed it on our normal schedule once per day, and now we're feeding it to make bread, which means we're going to feed it a little bit bigger, and then we're going to try to catch it at that perfect point where it's risen up and it's kind of domed, but it hasn't fallen, and that's when we want to use it to make bread. So we're doing that tonight so that tomorrow morning we can mix the bread. So it's 9 p.m. now. I think I put on the next videos at 8 or 8:30 is when we're going to mix. So we got about 12-13 hours. So we want it to be at that peak viability at about 12-13 hours. So for 1 loaf of bread, you want roughly 150 grams total of mature starter. So I'm going to make 4 loaves of bread. So we're going to do 600 grams total. So then we need to decide how much starter. Hi, Marcia. We
That's
need
the best part. It's like hello.
we need to decide how much starter to use to make 600 grams, and we have about 12-13 hours. That's a long time. So you can see this sat for 12 or 13 hours, and it's way past its peak viability. It's already collapsed, and it's just kind of gross. It smells really, really strong. So we probably want to use less starter to make that 600 grams, because clearly 12 to 13 hours with a good starter is a long time. So we're going to use a little bit of starter. Then the second easy way to control the amount of time is the temperature of your water. So we've got 12-13 hours. We're going to use a little bit colder water. That'll kind of slow down the process. If we use warm water, it would happen a lot faster. So let's mix it up. So if you're going to bake with me this week, if you want to do 1 loaf of bread, aim for about 150 grams of starter. So if we got 12-13 hours, if you're going to stick with my schedule, I'd say get out your scale. Actually, want to grab a little bowl to mix our starter, please. So if you want 150 grams of starter, and we've got about 12-13 hours to go, I would say 1 cold water. So get yourself a little bit of cold water there. Perfect. And then we're going to use, I'd say measure out try 10 grams of starter. So for me, I'm doing 4 times that. I'm doing 600 grams of starter. So I'm going to use 40 grams of starter. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my starter into the bowl. So you're zeroing that out. So we're going to put 40 grams in there. If you're making one loaf of bread, so you need about 150 grams of mature starter tomorrow, put about 10 grams in there roughly. It doesn't have to be exact. And this is where you practice, because your house may be warmer. So tonight it may grow too quickly, or it may not grow enough, depending on whether you use heat or not. So, all right, she's got about 40 grams in there. And now we're going to do equal parts. This is just exactly the same way as you feed it normally, when you're feeding it every day just to keep it alive. So we're going to do equal parts by weight, water, and flour. So I need 600 grams total. So half of that's going to be water. So we need 300 grams of water. Okay, good. And if you're doing this at home for one loaf of bread, then you need 75 grams of water. So you've got 10 grams of starter and 75 grams of water.
Do you want to do what's better to do, the flour or water first?
Water first, because then you can mix up the starter and it kind of spreads it out. So,
Okay.
If you're doing a large amount, you wouldn't want a clump
Has a hair.
starter. Thank God that bread's for us. You don't have to say that out loud.
I'm sorry. Sorry, guys.
So we're doing 300.
Authentic
You're doing
cooking.
75. You're probably going to need more water than that. Cold. And you wanted it to be faster. You wanted it to be ready to use warmer water, or use more mature, or use more starter in your mix. So if you want 150 grams, then instead of using like 10 grams of starter to start, you would use like 40 or 50. So that puts more bacteria and yeast that's already active and growing, puts a larger population into what you're growing. Yes, in a general sense. So AW, I avoid chlorinated water as much as I can. When I made large batches of bread, what I would do is I would leave the water out. It's something I try to do here when I'm baking myself, but sometimes I just forget. It's not the end of the world. Santa Cruz water, if you're in Santa Cruz with us, tends to be a little bit chlorinated. You can really smell it. Not the best thing to grow bacteria. Obviously, bleach is not great for bacteria growth.
Really?
Not shocking. So what you can do is you can just put a little water out and then just let it sit, and the chlorine will naturally evaporate a little bit. There'll always be a little bit in there, but that's a good way to get around it. And I tried to do that myself. When I was baking a lot of bread, I would do that because it's simple. And then it also gets to room temperature, which is usually a nice temperature for making bread. Usually pretty stable.
Just a tip is when you add the water and you get up to the 300 grams, make sure that you tar it back so that you are adding in 300 again. Or you can add up to the 600, depending on how you want to do it.
AW, would using more starter initially create more tangy flavor? Yes, because it's going to mature past a point. So what you'd be doing then, what would create more flavor there, or more of that tangy flavor, is you're adding more of a matured starter to it. So essentially, if we're turning 10 grams into 150, that's a very small amount. You're not putting a lot of those lactic and acetic acids into there. But if you were trying to make 150 and you started with 75, and that 75 had already matured, and then you were going to mature that for another point, then you're adding a lot of those acids and alcohols and all that in there. So yes, you are seeding it more. So the longer that you let it go, the more, call it, flavor you'll get. Now you can adjust that a couple of different ways. Temperature changes the type of acids that you get, as well as your hydration changes the type of acids. If you go more a little bit thinner, you're going to get more lactic acids, those like kind of milky sweet acids. And if you go into a thicker starter and thicker bread, then you'll start getting more acetic acids, that more like vinegary taste. So
Question. So when you want to mix this all up, do you want to do it super rough and just get it all wet?
just go for it, yeah. The hydration level, so this is not like mixing your bread, for those of you who've watched that and done that. It can be a little bit hard to mix the bread because your hydration is much, much lower. This is 100% hydration. So for those of you who want to talk baker's percentages, you can look it up and get more detail. But all it means is flour is 100% always, and everything is a percentage of that. So if you have 100 grams of flour, this is an easy one. If you have 100 grams of flour, that's 100%. And if you have 100 grams of water, that's 100% water. If you have 75 grams of water, it's 75% water. So everything is a percentage of your flour. So if you have 160 grams of flour, everything in your recipe is now a percentage of that 162 grams. So if you have 81 grams of water, that's 50% water or 50% hydration. So you'll hear hydration a lot, and you'll hear baker's percentages a bit. So it's easier if you know that, because then we can talk the same thing. Even if I'm making 100 loaves of bread, I can tell you what my percentages are, and then you can make one loaf of bread that fits your size and do the exact same thing that I'm doing.
Are we gonna write this out for people?
Probably. This is the easy part. There's not a lot of numbers to remember. So, yeah, looks good. I don't know if you can see that, but all you're doing is just stirring it up. There's nothing complicated about it.
Very thick.
One thing that you'll hear a lot, so I'll try to dispel some of the notions that, or some of the like folklore about it that you'll hear from people. I've heard, strangely, that you shouldn't mix it with a metal spoon. There's nothing to that. Yeah, I don't know how that started or what it's for. Doesn't matter. Do it in plastic, do it in glass, do it with metal, do it with plastic, do it with wood. Doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. So you don't have to worry about that. One thing I would say is don't pick a bowl like this. Pick something straight-sided so that you can see it grow, preferably something clear, because what's going to happen, something that has any sort of this bow, you're not going to be able to tell when it's actually grown. Because it's spreading out instead of going up, and it's nice, especially when you're learning, to be able to watch it. So even when you're feeding it every day, like this is the kind of container that I keep my everyday starter in. I only fill it up about a third of the way, and then I can watch it as I go throughout my day and say, okay, look at that. I fed it with this kind of water at this temperature, and I had this much starter to start, and I watched it, and 5 hours later it looked like it was ready to use. So you always get an idea of like how long things take, and you're always practicing, even when you're just feeding your starter, even when it's just your everyday, you always watch it.
So next time we won't put it in this metal
It's
bowl.
fine, we'll scrape it into a different thing. So
Wait, someone asked a question.
yeah, that's so the question is so you should experiment with the amount of starter that you like, in that way that it will produce more, call it tanginess, more flavor, more acid, more alcohols. You'll put more things into it by starting with more starter, but there will come a point, because your starter expands so much, you rip apart a lot of those protein and starch
what does it
matrices.
look like if you're like looking down into the pot when it starts to like break apart? Can you tell, or is it when you put a fork in it sort of like running? No,
Do you mean the starter or the bread?
the starter.
The starter you'll actually see collapse, because there's so much water in it, because it's 100% hydration, it's equal parts, that even just a lot of movement will actually collapse it. So, yeah, which is why it's nice to do it in a straight-sided container, so you can really see it grow easily.
Are we still frozen? AW?
Anyone else out there? Are we frozen? Can you see us? I don't know if it's recording.
I can't tell. Well, it says it's
Oh well.
Oh well.
Any other questions? Because otherwise,
Wait.
We're frozen. Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. Any other questions before we go away? Anything you want answered about growing a starter, or tomorrow, or if you're making bread?
What
anything.
time are we meeting tomorrow?
I have no idea. I think it's 8 or 8:30 or 9. It's something like that.
Anybody who can see the schedule want to tell us what time we're supposed to meet you?
You
in
can
the
just look at
morning?
the schedule. It's on there. All right. No other questions?
Are you using
Oh,
white flour? Oh, good question.
that's good.
It's a mixture between white. No.
Not this.
Not
for,
this one?
For the bread, it is.
Oh.
Why does it matter if we use white flour, or a whole wheat flour, or a whole grain flour?
Is it saturation though? No.
All
I
right.
don't know.
Back to the drawing board. All right. So
I'm not a professional, guys. I am just a guest.
we are using white flour. When you're when your starter is mature, it doesn't matter as much what flour you use. You can use anything. I had a question on this last time, whether using whole grain flour, whether that's wheat or a different variety of grain, would bring in other bacteria into your starter. And it will change it over time a little bit, but that's going to happen naturally. If you have a healthy starter culture, it's already kind of balanced out. It's already figured out what it's like. Bacteria are very aggressive, so the odds of something else coming in is pretty minimal. But it is going to change over time because you're changing variables all the time. So this process is called backslopping. It's not a very beautiful word, but the process of feeding via backslopping is not very accurate. And you're not doing it, especially at home, you're not doing it exactly the same every time. Your temperature is not the same because you're not in a climate, you're climate controlled, but you're not in a lab. So things are always changing. The temperature of water is changing, the temperature of your room, the type of flour that you're using, when you feed it is changing. None of us are perfect. You'll probably forget about it for a day or two, and some things die and all this. So yeah, but to get back to it, it doesn't matter what you feed it. Feed it white flour, feed it whole grain flour, feed it whatever. Just as long as you feed it, just try to feed it at least once a day, and it'll be happy and be ready to use whenever you want.
So we're gonna answer Nancy's, and then one more question.
We'll answer
Yeah.
all the questions.
Okay. Well, then we'll be here all night.
That's
Nancy
fine.
wants to know how much you add. I think she missed the first
I'm
part.
going to add the starter you gave me today and what amount. So, two different things. If you want to make bread with it, we're going to make bread tomorrow morning. So if you want to make bread now, add 75 grams of water and 75 grams of flour to what I gave you today, which was like 10, 15, 20 grams of starter. So mix that up. So you'll have about 175 grams total, and you'll be ready to make bread tomorrow with 150 grams of it, with a little bit left over to continue on and be your little starter baby. So,
Good question, Catherine.
what?
Are you gonna open your own store?
I'm trying, but everything's shut down, even if I wanted to. 9 a.m. tomorrow is when we're going to mix our bread.
Stay away from bleach. Something.
And Nancy, the other thing I was going to say, so that's if you want to make bread. If you don't want to make bread right now, but you just want to keep it alive, then take that little amount. So take about 25 grams of it and add 12 grams roughly of water and 12 grams of flour. Mix it up. Now you have about 50 grams. And then once a day, do that exact same thing. Go back down to 25. So take a little scoop of it out and throw it away. It's going to be like a teaspoon. And then add 12 grams of water and 12 grams of flour to get back to 50. So you go to 50, and then you go down 25, and you feed it back up to 50. And then every day do that exact same process. And when you want to make bread, instead of taking it from 50 to 25, you just add 75 and 75 and build it up, and then use that. So, and you can go back to the beginning of the video to find out how to make it ready slower or how to make it ready faster so that it's ready to use for bread. There's ways you can do that. So go back and you'll see some of those tips.
One more question. I'm the taskmaster.
You can, I'll hang out. I don't care. I've got nothing else to do.
Quarantine life.
How long can you keep a starter going, Marcia? Indefinitely. I mean, they go, there's all these stories of, my great-great-great-grandmother's uncle's dog started this one. They can go forever.
Did you ever get those chain letters, like bake the cookies and like?
No one ever sent me those.
I guess you're a boy.
But I know it's the friendship bread.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can keep it going indefinitely. That is the one thing that I would dispel, though, is that an older starter doesn't make it necessarily better. There is a point where it develops a certain robustness. You have different lactic acid producing bacteria and a bunch of different wild yeast strains, and they all have to find out how to coexist. So your starter can be a little bit finicky if you start a brand new at least once a day and really keeping it stable. So there is a certain point where after about 6 months to a year of really solid feeding, it becomes almost bulletproof. But a starter that's a year old versus a starter that's 500 years old doesn't make any difference. Doesn't give you any extra flavors. Doesn't do anything special. It's cool. It's a really, really neat story that you kept something alive over that long, but it's definitely changed. All those different variables that we talked about earlier in the video, all of your different flour and temperature and feeding schedule, all of that slowly changes the microbial makeup of your individual starter. So, and if you happen to have access to a killer lab and you can actually see what's in there, they haven't named all of these bacteria because there's tons of different ones that you find in a starter culture. But if you had a really cool lab or a friend, you could find out what was in yours, which would be neat. Tell me if you do, because that'd be cool.
We're gonna add all of the sort of instructions and everything in a comment below, just so we don't keep repeating ourselves. I see.
Yeah, Jemezi. Yeah, pretty much you got that right. For making bread, depends on how much bread you're going to make. 150 grams for the loaves that we're making, so you can do the math there. If it's half water, half flour, plus a little bit of starter. So, and you can scroll back in the video, and we went through all that earlier. Kanan, I have no idea what all of that is. How you doing, buddy?
Also, someone asked about smells like alcohol. Is it garbage now? Their starter.
I try to drink it and see what happens.
Tell us how it
Tell
goes.
us. Yeah, I'm curious. Hey, Finn. I mean, a lot of times it'll smell strong. It's only dead if you can't make it grow. So when you feed it room temperature water and room temperature flour, it should pop. It should really like grow, and in a fairly short amount of time. You know, if it doesn't do that, continue feeding it and see if it does over the course of a couple days. But again, remember to throw out some of it, because you have this culture, and if you're just making it bigger, but you're giving it the same amount of flour, like you're giving it this much flour, but now it's this, it's this big, you're not actually feeding it. You have this whole thing's full of bacteria, but you're only giving it that much flour. That doesn't make any sense. So make sure that you're getting rid of some of it, unless your intention is to make it as big as you want. Like I do, when I was baking full time, it was 100 loaves of bread, and I would start with this much in the morning, and that would be 100 loaves of bread by the next day. So you don't need a lot of starter. Do not carry a giant quart mason jar around. Get yourself a tiny little thing. So that's a common mistake. People keep so much starter, but when you got a billion bacteria in there, you don't need a bunch to have a big cross sample.
We're not medical
starter alcohol
professionals,
healthy?
So we can't.
You're not old enough to drink any of that, Ken. So you're gonna have to wait a couple years. I don't know. You're gonna have to find out. What else we got?
I'll scroll up really quickly.
Red flour. Oh, that's a good one. Versus all-purpose flour. Any difference? Yeah. Typically, bread flour is it's a higher protein count. About 13 to 14% is average. Of course, it depends on the company. All-purpose sits at about 11 to 12.5% protein. You could use either for this type of bread. There are certain things that you want a really high protein count. Bagels, pretzels are nice. Something that you want a little bit of a chew. It's nice to have a higher protein count, but you can make bread. I use an 11.5%, which is so the flour that we ordered is about an 11.5%, depending on the time of the year and stuff like that. There's a few different, of course it changes as they mix in different things. And there's a lot more technical side to that we can discuss at some other point. Flour's pretty crazy.
That's another episode, guys.
Yeah. But yeah, you can use all purpose, you can use anything. So there's plenty of protein in that. Anything else on there?
They just want to hear you say a bread joke. And then with your bread joke, you should close out.
Bread jokes. I don't think I have any bread jokes.
Next time.
Man. What jokes were we doing? We were telling bad jokes. Terrible freaking jokes. But none of them had anything to do with bread. What did we have?
No.
We had the.
Let's leave them in suspense.
Okay, yeah. We'll figure out some bread jokes. So you guys ask some bread jokes, and we'll try to guess what the answer is next time. So.
Okay, see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Save money and use English for starter. AW.
All right, we got a really bad one. You deserve better.
We'll
than
take a
what we
look.
have to
So
offer.
AW, we'll take a look at that. So brominating. So what you call bleach flour? We could talk about that. Everything that I use is unbleached. You can still use brominated flour to make bread, but we'll talk more about that because that's a more complicated thing and kind of interesting. So,
Okay.
all right, Joe.
We have a joke.
Wait,
and we're
what?
going to leave
Oh.
you on the joke. What's the most sophisticated bread there is on offer?
I have no idea.
Upper crust.
Oh,
Bye.
Nice. That's terrible.
I tried.
Oh,